choir to back me up tonight. So it's going to be you. And we're going to start with, please join me in this song. And if you don't know it, it's very easy, especially the first part. Just say It means the Jewish people live. Am Yisrael. Welcome to 5784, the Hashana Tova, the 23rd high holidays that I have spent here at Temple Beth Abraham, which is just amazing to me, although not when I look at the gray hair in the mirror. As most of you know, on Erev Rosh Hashana, I like to introduce the theme that will be connecting all my high holiday sermons together. And the theme this year is Israel, which is not a surprise given that I spent most of my sabbatical, 4 of my 5 months, living in Jerusalem, Israel. Before I go on with that, a couple things. First of all, let's say sabbatical. I want to say thank you again for that, for these incredible 5 months. To all who stepped up in my absence, the leadership. It was incredibly meaningful, everything I hoped it would be and more. So again, thank you. Secondly, before I talk about this year's theme, this is where I test myself really. Anybody remember last year's theme? Just shout it out if you do. Anybody? Greece. All right. Okay, pretty good. All right, a couple of you at least got it. It was Greece or things related to Greek. It's a very loose theme. And this Israel theme actually is also looser than you think, right? I am not going to be talking about the geopolitics of the Middle East really at all. I'm not going to solve all of Israel's internal or external problems because, we can do that over here. Everyone says they can anyway. But I mean Israel in a more expansive sense. Okay, so last night, if you were here, we talked about the meaning of the word Yisrael, to struggle with God, and the incident where Jacob became Israel, and what that meant, and how we could be inspired by him as well as the people of Israel and the land of Israel. Today we're going to be talking about Am Yisrael, the Jewish people, which is why I began with that song. On Yom Kippur, I will be talking about the land of Israel, the state of Israel, but more about Karen and my experiences there over the four months that we spent there this past spring and summer. And finally, on Yom Kippur morning, it's kind of a stretch. I'm calling it ancient Israel, but we're really talking about what's in the Torah portion, the scapegoat, and what that means. But it's not about anti-Semitism. It's literally about the scapegoat and other ways that can be important and inspirational to us. So let's talk about Am Yisrael today, the people Israel. Did you know that the word Jew is really not used at all in the Torah? What we are called are Israelites, or B'nai Yisrael, literally the children of Israel, the descendants of Israel, the God, our patriarch, Jacob, who became Israel after that rest lineage. And even in the prayer book, when you see the word Israel, it's usually not referring to the land, it's actually referring to the people. And the reason the land is called Israel is because of the place where we became a people, where the descendants of Israel became Am Yisrael, the people of Israel. So that's what it was like in ancient times. But what is it like today? What does it mean when we say we're a part of Am Yisrael, or a Jew? I'm going to use those terms fairly interchangeably over the next few minutes. And I'm going to attempt to tackle 3 different facets or questions. The first is, what does a Jew or a member of Am Yisrael look like? The second is, what does a member of Am Yisrael, or how does a member of Am Yisrael identify or practice being a part of the Jewish people? And the last one, what does it actually mean? Does it mean you're part of a religion, culture, an ethnicity, even a race? So those are the questions that I'm going to attempt to address. So I want to start with, what does a Jew, what does a member of Am Yisrael look like? Because we make a lot of assumptions about what a Jew looks like. But I don't care what you assume or what people tell you about what a Jew is supposed to look like. Because your assumption is probably wrong. And not just today, actually historically. Okay, so I used to have a coffee mug. It broke, sadly. It was really cute. And it had a bunch of musical notes on it and a bunch of Hebrew letters on it. And the Hebrew letters are looking over the musical notes, and they look kind of alike, actually, if you think about it. And I think it's the letter Tav says to the letter Chet. Funny, they don't look Jewish. It was really a great mug. I miss it, but it broke. It's long. But funny you don't look Jewish is actually not something you can say anymore, because it is both insensitive but also inaccurate. Right? There is not a single way to look like you are part of Am Yisrael. Now, because the majority of American Jews, and that is true even today, are descended from Eastern European Ashkenazic Jews, 99.88% 23andMe, so maybe perhaps looking like me. But that doesn't mean that everyone is. But we used to say, because of that, if you had blonde hair and blue eyes, or if you had darker skin, people would say, that's not a Jewish thing. But in fact, actually the first Jews in America were Sephardic Jews. They came from Spain and Portugal by way of Recife, Brazil. And worldwide, the majority of Jews in Israel actually come from Middle Eastern countries. And they look like they come from Middle Eastern countries, although there's so much mixing, it doesn't really matter anymore, it's hard to tell, but they go by the identity Mizrahi Jews from the Middle East, and I'm talking about countries like Yemen, Morocco, Syria, Iran, Iraq, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, all these places. And there's even an organization headquartered in the Bay Area called Jemena, Jews indigenous to the Middle East and North Africa, that tells their story and advocates for their history. There are also Jews in Africa. Many of you have heard of the Beta Israel. You might call them falashas, which you shouldn't. That's a derogatory term. Those are Ethiopian Jews who were cut off from most of the Jewish world for centuries. But they call themselves the House of Israel, Beta Israel. There's a Jewish community in Uganda. They call themselves the Abba Yudaya, and it's their melody for Am Yisrael, which you sang just a few minutes ago, and it's pretty popular in America and right here at Temple Beth Abraham. There are also Jewish communities in India, at least three distinct ones. The B'nai Menashe, who believe they're descended from the tribe of Menashe. The B'nai Israel, our original name, after all, and the Kochini Jews. There are also there is a Jewish community in Kaifeng, China, and these communities have been there for centuries. And in addition, now, there are communities all over the world who are trying to rediscover their Jewish roots. In Africa, you've got the Lemda in South Africa and Zimbabwe. You've got the Igbo in Nigeria. You've got the descendants of David in Madagascar. And there are similar communities in Peru, Central America, South America. They're reclaiming their Jewish roots, and they're not all accepted by the entire world as halachically Jewish, according to Jewish law, but they definitely consider themselves and really are a part of the people of Israel, Am Yisrael. Brian Schwartz, past president of the congregation, documented many of those communities about 20 years ago, and it's interesting, you should talk to him about his research into them. And that's just worldwide. Jews in America are looking more and more diverse these days as well. And I can tell you that almost every Jew of color has a story about something inappropriate said to them or something inappropriate asked of them in any congregation, including ours, of a time they can. Yeah. Yes. Most have many stories, right? It's true. We have to be more sensitive to that to start. And one of the ways you can do that, and this is my recommendation, is you just kind of assume that if, at least on a non-bar mitzvah weekend, somebody walks in the room, they're probably Jewish. Okay, my son Michael, when he was 7 or 8 years old, he said, well, they're here for services. You know, why else would they be here? They must be Jewish, right? So if you start with that assumption in mind, it goes a long way. But I also don't want to leave you with the impression that despite the insensitive things said to many people, that it's an unmitigated disaster. Because that is the story, the narrative that the Jewish press drums over and over again because it generates clicks. All right? Many, at least I would say most Jews of color who belong to synagogues are very comfortable at their synagogues. They're just simply a part of our synagogues. So it's not the it's not the unmitigated disaster you might think. And so I was very pleased and proud to see an article in the newspaper, the Jewish newspaper, The Forward, about one of our own Jews of color, and the only one that happens to be a Broadway star. And that's Zachary Noah Pizer, who, when he was named as the first Asian Dear Evan Hansen, the actual Evan Hansen character on Broadway, he was interviewed by the press, and I see Elizabeth's got a water bottle souvenir from that. I actually have this cast right here that he wore for the show. But the interviewer went in with the same assumption. You must have an identity crisis. People must have treated you terribly growing up, being half Asian and half Jewish. And he had a number of responses. The first response was, yes, there's Jews of color. Welcome to the 21st century. Okay, that was the first response. But then he also went on further to describe the fact that he was taught by mom and dad that he was never half this and half that. He could be equally proud of both his identities, as an Asian and as a Jew. Now, he went on to say how growing up, his family was in weekly attendance at the service, and he remains extremely close to his rabbi. So, kind of like the story. Spread around as much as I could. But the point of all this is that there really is no single way to look like you are part of the people of Israel. And just as there is no single way to look like you are a part of the people of Israel, there is no single way to practice being part of the people of Israel or to identify as being part of the people of Israel. For many, it is absolutely a religious obligation. And the way you practice being a Jew is by following commandments, mitzvot. Others will say, well, I'm not really personally observant, but I really believe in Jewish values, midot. They'll usually use the Hebrew phrase tikkun olam when they speak of this, which means repairing the world. But there are many other Jews, even Jews who come every week to synagogue, who say, no, I'm none of those things. I'm a cultural Jew. I'm part of the Jewish community. And being a cultural Jew means different things to different people too. It can be gastronomical, right? It can be about Jewish food. But what is Jewish food? Right? Is it gefilte fish and brisket and potato latkes, smoked fish? Or is it hummus, tahina, falafel, sufganiyot? Right? Depends which Jewish culture you come from, right? They're all equally Jewish foods. If you want more information about this, consult another of our members, Faith Kramer, who wrote a fabulous cookbook called 52 Shabbats, which describes a lot of these recipes from the different Jewish cultures. But to some, it's just about being part of a big, giant Jewish family, right? It could be when you find out that somebody is Jewish that's famous, right? You start felling, right? It can be a comedian, right? Because that's part of our culture too, sense of humor. Flowing from Jackie Mason to Joan Rivers to Jerry Seinfeld to Amy Schumer. It could be a Nobel Prize winner, like Saul Bellow or Ben Bernanke, or the many Jewish Nobel Prize winners in physics whose names unfortunately do not roll off the tip of my tongue. It can be a famous Jewish athlete. It can be pitcher Max Scherzer of the Atlanta Braves, or gymnast Ali Raisman. Right? It can be an actor, a Gal Gadot, a Daveed Diggs. It could be a singer, a Barbara Streisand, a Paul Simon, a Drake, Doja Cat. Right? All these people are part of the people of Israel. And we get proud, right? Because they're part of our Jewish family. Right? There's no one single way to practice or to be a Jew. And I found this message really reinforced to me in a very unexpected place. A television show on Netflix, which I'm sure at least some of you have seen, The Jewish Matchmaker. Raise your hand if you've seen The Jewish Matchmaker. Okay, so I think a good quarter of you. Now, okay, it's a dating show, right? Which means that people are going to act like idiots, right? And they're going to sabotage themselves as best they can. That is the point of a dating show. But what this dating show does really beautifully and really sensitively, it's an Orthodox matchmaker. She presents all kinds of Jewish identities, and all of them positively. She's not really, the show, the narrator, whatever, the producer, they're judgmental about the behavior in terms of dating, but not at all about how they are Jewish. And so, in January, I'm teaching a course on that show about Jewish identity. We're going to look at these different Jews, and I hope you'll join me. It's going to be a lot of fun exploring Jewish identities through the Jewish method. So, no one way to practice being part of Am Yisrael. And now, probably the most controversial one. What does it mean to be a Jew? To be a part of Am Yisrael? Is it a religion? Of course. Is it a culture? Of course. But is it also an ethnicity or even a race? Now, I know I'm going to get pushback on that last one. My confirmation class argued with me every week about it, even if the subject was like abortion or something. Right? That's what they wanted to talk about. To say that Jews are a race does not fit in with the last 30 years of what in America constitutes a race. But I can tell you that what's mattered for 3,000 years, or 4,000 years, depending on whether you count from Moses or Abraham, to me, that's actually what's more instructive and more important than what a current American definition is. So, by American standards, today, race is about just skin color and power and powerlessness. And Jews in that construct are white. And actually, in the world of critical ethnic studies, white and privileged, which is the worst thing you can be. But to a white supremacist, we are certainly not white at all. In fact, Jews are the mortal enemy of the white race. And I think if we're honest with ourselves, you have to admit that when anti-Semitism has been at its most violent, it has been against Jews specifically as a race. The Spanish inquisitors and the Nazis did not care if you were religious or secular. They did not care if you had a strong Jewish identity or you didn't identify as a Jew at all. They didn't care if you said, well, I only eat lox and smoked whitefish. Okay? They did not care. They killed you because you had Jewish blood. Now, the idea of Jews as a race has also not always been negative, actually. There's a quotation on the lobby of the brand spanking new Anu Museum of the Jewish People in Tel Aviv, which our congregational trip had the opportunity to visit this past summer. Beautiful museum. It's replaced the Museum of the Jewish Diaspora. And on the wall of the lobby, gigantic letters, is a quotation from Winston Churchill, of all people, which says, some people like the Jews, and some people do not. But no thoughtful man can doubt the fact that they are, without question, the most formidable and most remarkable race of people that has ever appeared in the world. So, you don't have to view it that way. In fact, what I would really call Am Yisrael is exactly what it says in Hebrew. It's a peoplehood. Okay, that's what being Jewish is about, and it encompasses all those things. But I want us to think about all the ways that we consider ourselves and that others consider us, because that's being a part of Am Yisrael too. And I also want to say that I don't think it's a coincidence that the Torah portions today, on the day that more of Am Yisrael gather than just about any other day in the Jewish calendar, the Torah and the Haftorah portion are basically about making sure the Jewish peoplehood continues, because it's the fertility stories of two women, of Sarah and Hannah. So, if there is no single way to look like you are part of the people of Israel, if there is no single way to practice or identify being part of the people of Israel, is there anything that binds us together besides the fact that anti-Semites hate us all? And for that, I turn to one of my mentor rabbis, Rabbi Brian Fox of Sydney, Australia. Zichrono Livracha, blessed memory, he died just a few years ago. I had the opportunity to work for him in 1997 and 1998. And what he said, look to the book of Ruth. Because in the book of Ruth, when Ruth follows Naomi into the land of Israel, she says, wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. She's casting her lot with the Jewish people. And even though he knows and I know and most of us know that the definition, the technical definition of a Jew is someone who has a Jewish mother and has converted to Judaism, at least it is in conservative and orthodoxy, that's the technical definition, of course, and we do practice that here at Temple Beth Abraham. If any person is willing to cast their lot with the Jewish people, despite all the mishigas, despite all the painful history, despite the anti-Semitism, despite it all, if you are willing to say, wherever you go, I will go, wherever you lodge, I will lodge, your people will be my people, and your God, my God, then you indeed are a part of Am Yisrael. And may 5784 be a year where Am Yisrael Chai, the Jewish people live and live well. Am Yisrael Chai, Am Yisrael Chai, Am Yisrael Chai, Am Yisrael Chai. Shana Tova.